We heard you bought this gorgeous cabin in Aspen. We're moving in to leave all the grudges behind. My daughter-in-law barked, shoving her suitcases through my door like she already owned the place. I just smiled and let them barge in. But the second they stepped into the great room and saw what was waiting for them, every drop of color drained from their faces. My name is George Sterling. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a mountain cabin in Aspen, Colorado. For 32 years, I built something from nothing. I started as a line cook at a greasy diner in Denver. By the time I hung up my apron, I owned 4 restaurants under my own name, Sterling's Grill. Maybe you've heard of it. I sold the whole chain 3 years ago for $3.8 million. Not bad for a kid who grew up washing dishes for minimum wage. Now, I spend my days fly fishing on the Roaring Fork River and collecting rare 19th century cookbooks. It was a peaceful life, a quiet life, the kind of retirement I had earned. At least, that is what I thought. Let me tell you about my son, Julian. He's 41 now, working as a mid-level manager at an IT company in Aurora. He makes decent money, around $78,000 a year last I heard. Not that he ever talks to me about his life anymore. That stopped about 7 years ago, right around the time he married Victoria. Victoria Thorne. Well, Victoria Sterling now is 38, doesn't work, and has never met a mirror she didn't like. She used to be a real estate agent before she decided that being Julian's wife was a full-time job. Her real full-time job, as far as I can tell, is spending money they don't have and looking down her nose at people she considers beneath her. That list, unfortunately, includes me. I remember when Julian was a boy. He'd run to the door every time I came home from a long kitchen shift, his little arms reaching up for me. "Daddy, Daddy," he would shout, wanting to hear everything about what I cooked, who came in, and what funny things happened. He used to say he'd work in my kitchen one day. That boy had stars in his eyes. I don't know where that boy went. The change was gradual at first. After the wedding, Julian started calling less. Once a week became once a month. Once a month became holidays only. Then even the holidays got shorter. Christmas 2 years ago was the last time I saw them before everything fell apart. I had made a prime rib roast my specialty, and was telling a story about a famous food critic who once tried to sneak into my kitchen. Victoria rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. She picked at her food like it was beneath her, then announced she was watching her carbs and pushed the plate away. Julian said nothing. He just stared at his hands. But the moment that really opened my eyes happened about a year ago. I had called Julian's phone, and he must have pocket answered because I heard voices. Their voices. That old man still kicking around? That was Victoria. Her tone was dripping with something I can only describe as contempt mixed with impatience. When's he going to leave us the money and stop being such a burden? I waited for Julian to defend me, to say something, anything. "Soon, probably," my son replied. "He's not getting any younger." I hung up and sat in my kitchen for about an hour, just staring at the wall. 32 years of building a legacy, and my own son was just waiting for me to die so he could cash in. That is when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. 4 months ago, I got a curious phone call. Dr. David Thornton, an old acquaintance from the country club, called to ask if everything was all right with my health. I said I was fine. "Why?" He hesitated, then told me that a woman claiming to be my daughter-in-law had been asking him questions. Very specific questions about the process for having an elderly relative declared mentally incompetent and about guardianship procedures in Colorado. I thanked him and hung up. Then, I made some calls of my own, which brings me to 3 days ago. The doorbell rang at 2 in the afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. Beatrice, my neighbor, usually just walks in through the back, and the delivery guys know to leave packages on the porch. I set down my coffee and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures. A tall one, a shorter one, and lots of luggage. I opened the door. "Dad," Victoria chirped. Yes, she calls me Dad now. Isn't that something? She pushed past me before I could say a word, dragging 2 massive suitcases behind her. Their wheels scraped against my hardwood floors. "We heard you bought this gorgeous cabin in Aspen. We're moving in. Time to put all those silly misunderstandings behind us, don't you think?" Julian stood behind her, looking everywhere except at my face. He was carrying 3 more bags. "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "Julian, what a surprise. Isn't it wonderful?" Victoria was already surveying the living room, her eyes calculating and assessing. I recognized that look. I had seen real estate agents wear it when they were mentally pricing a property. Family reunited at last. We've been so distant lately. And I said to Julian, we need to fix this. Family is everything. Family is everything, I repeated. The words tasted like ash. Julian finally met my eyes. For just a moment I saw something there, guilt maybe, or shame. Then it was gone, replaced by that blank look Victoria had trained into him. "It's good to see you, Dad," he said. "Is it?" Victoria laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, George, always with the jokes. Now which room is ours? We've had such a long drive from Aurora." I smiled, a genuine smile which seemed to unsettle her slightly. "Of course. Let me help you with those bags." As they struggled with their luggage in the hallway, bickering about which suitcase went where, I reached into my pocket. My phone was there, right where I had put it when I heard their car pull up. I pressed record. The first 3 days of our family reunion were educational. Victoria started redecorating my home before she had even unpacked. "These curtains, Dad, they look so cheap. We should replace them." She ran her fingers along the hand-woven fabric I had bought from a local artisan in Snowmass Village. "I know a great designer in Denver. She could really transform this place." Transform. That was an interesting word choice. Transform my $2.3 million cabin into something that fit her taste, her vision, and eventually her name on the deed. "I'll think about it," I said, and went to make coffee. Julian was useless, of course. He agreed with everything Victoria said, nodding along like one of those bobblehead dogs people put on their dashboards. "She's right, Dad. The place could use some updates." He wouldn't look at me when he said it. I remembered a different Julian, 12 years old, standing in my kitchen after hours, carefully plating a practice dish. "Is this right, Dad?" "Perfect," I had told him. "You're a natural." That boy had opinions, dreams, a spine. Somewhere along the way, Victoria had surgically removed it. On the second day, I conducted a small experiment. I left some documents on the kitchen table, the property appraisal for the cabin. $2.3 million, right there in black and white. Then I went to my study and watched through the crack in the door. Victoria found them within 20 minutes. She looked around, checking if anyone was watching, then pulled out her phone. Click, photographing every page. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She thought she was being clever. She had no idea she was dancing exactly to my tune. That evening, I announced I was going for a walk. "The fresh mountain air helps me think," I said. "Might be gone a few hours." "Oh, take your time, Dad." Victoria's smile was all teeth. "We'll hold down the fort." I drove to Denver instead. Dominic Cross's office was on the 15th floor of a building on Court Place. He specialized in elder law, protecting seniors from exploitation and handling estate disputes. I had found him through careful research, not through any personal connection. When you're planning for battle, you don't want your general to have divided loyalties. "Mr. Sterling." He shook my hand firmly. He was in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You said on the phone this was urgent." I told him everything. The overheard phone call, Dr. Thornton's warning, Victoria's questions about incompetency proceedings, and the photographs I had just watched her take. Dominic listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. "Colorado has strong laws protecting at-risk adults," he said, "but guardianship cases can get complicated. They'll need medical evidence that you're incapable of managing your own affairs." "Which doesn't exist," I said. "Because there's nothing wrong with me." "That's your advantage. Document everything. Record conversations. Colorado is a one-party consent state, and I think we should bring in additional help. I know a private investigator, a former police detective, who is very discreet. If your daughter-in-law has been making moves, Brooke will find out. Brooke Carter." I would remember that name. We spent 2 hours mapping out a preliminary defense strategy. By the time I left, the sun had set, and the drive back to Aspen would take nearly 4 hours. I didn't mind. I had a lot to think about. I remembered another moment years ago. Victoria had just started dating Julian, and they visited the restaurant. I had cooked for them personally, seared duck breast with cherry reduction. Victoria had taken one bite and pushed the plate away. "It's very rustic," she had said. "I prefer French cuisine, refined, you know." Even then, she was reshaping him, filing down his edges. Why didn't I fight for my son back then? because I believed family was supposed to work itself out. I was wrong. The drive back to Aspen was dark and winding. The mountains rose around me like silent witnesses. I thought about my restaurants, the thousands of decisions I had made over 3 decades. Every hire, every menu change, every negotiation with suppliers and landlords and critics. I had built an empire from nothing because I understood one fundamental truth. You can't wait for problems to solve themselves. You have to act. It was nearly 11 when I pulled into my driveway. The cabin was mostly dark, but a light was on in my study. I entered quietly through the side door, my footsteps soft on the hardwood. The study door was open just a crack. Through it, I could see Victoria. She was standing at my desk, phone in hand, photographing my financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, the deed to the cabin. She didn't hear me behind her. She was too focused on her work, her face illuminated by the phone's screen, a small smile playing on her lips. The smile of someone who thinks they're winning. I leaned against the door frame and cleared my throat. Victoria spun around, and for one beautiful moment, I saw pure panic in her eyes. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by that practiced smile. "Dad, you're back early. I thought I heard a noise in here. Wanted to make sure everything was okay. At 11 at night in my private study with your phone out?" I was checking the time. She slipped the phone into her pocket. Silly me. Well, good night. She brushed past me close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive, probably bought with money Julian didn't have. I watched her go. Then I walked to my desk, sat down and began to write. Names, dates, observations. Everything I had seen, everything I suspected, everything I knew. The game had begun, and unlike my son's wife, I knew exactly how it was going to end. 4 days had passed since their arrival, and I was learning more about my house guests than I ever wanted to know. The next morning, I invited them to join me in the great room. "Family meeting," I announced at breakfast. "Something important I need to discuss with you both." Victoria's eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting triple sevens. She exchanged a quick glance with Julian, a glance that said, "This is it, the inheritance talk." They practically sprinted to the living room, settling into the leather couch with expectant smiles plastered across their faces. What they didn't know was that I had been up since 5, arranging the room for maximum impact. 3 chairs were positioned near the fireplace. A thick manila folder sat on the coffee table, labeled "Sterling Case File" in bold black letters. Waiting in my study, ready to enter on cue, were 3 people Victoria and Julian had never met. "Before we begin," I said, standing by the window, "I'd like to introduce some colleagues who have been helping me with a few matters." I nodded toward the hallway. Dominic Cross entered first, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the professional attorney. Behind him came Edward Hayes, a notary I had engaged specifically for this occasion, carrying a leather portfolio. And finally, a woman in her mid-40s with short dark hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent 20 years as a police detective before going private. "This is Dominic Cross, my attorney," I said. "Edward Hayes, a licensed notary, and Brooke Carter, a private investigator I retained several weeks ago." The color drained from Victoria's face so fast I thought she might faint. Julian's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Neither of them moved. "Please." I gestured to the couch. "Sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Brooke placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. The first item was a photograph of Victoria, standing outside a medical office building in Denver. The sign in the background was clearly visible. Dr. Lillian Hirsch, MD, Psychiatry and Geriatric Mental Health. "Taken 3 weeks ago," Brooke said, her voice neutral and professional. "Your daughter-in-law made 2 visits to this office. She was asking about the process for having a family member evaluated for dementia." Victoria found her voice. That's an invasion of privacy. You can't just follow people around and take pictures." "Actually," Dominic interjected, "in Colorado, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in public spaces. Photographing someone entering a building from a public sidewalk is entirely legal." Brooke continued pulling out more documents. "I also obtained records of internet searches conducted from your home IP address." She spread the printouts on the table. How to have someone declared mentally incompetent in Colorado. Guardianship laws for elderly parents. How long does it take to become someone's legal guardian? Julian's face had gone from pale to green. Dad, I can explain. Can you? I asked. Because I'd love to hear it. We were just concerned about you living alone up here at your age. We wanted to make sure you were being taken care of. By taking control of my finances? By having me declared incompetent? I kept my voice level, almost conversational. That's an interesting definition of taking care of someone. Victoria had recovered enough to go on the offensive. This is ridiculous. You've been spying on us? Recording our conversations? She turned to Dominic. That's illegal. We'll sue. Dominic didn't even blink. Colorado is a one-party consent state, Mrs. Sterling. That means any conversation can be legally recorded as long as one participant consents. Your father-in-law consented to record his own conversations in his own home. Perfectly legal. Furthermore, Brooke added, I have records of a phone call you made 4 months ago to Dr. David Thornton. You told him you were concerned about your father-in-law's episodes of confusion and asked detailed questions about dementia diagnoses. I watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions. Shock, anger, fear, and finally something cold and calculating. She was regrouping, looking for an angle. Fine, she said finally, her voice hard. So, we were exploring our options. That's not a crime. We're family, and we have every right to be concerned about George's well-being. You have a right to be concerned, Dominic agreed. You do not have a right to commit fraud. Attempting to have someone declared incompetent when you know they are mentally sound, especially for financial gain, constitutes attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult under Colorado law. It's a felony. The word felony hung in the air like smoke. Julian looked like he might be sick. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. We haven't done anything, she said. We haven't filed any paperwork. We haven't made any legal moves. You can't charge us with attempting something we didn't actually do. She had a point, and she knew it. I could see the confidence returning to her eyes. You're right, I said. You haven't crossed any legal lines yet, which is why I'm giving you a choice. Pack your bags and leave my home by tomorrow morning, and we'll consider this matter closed. Stay, and I will pursue every legal avenue available to me. Victoria stood up slowly. She smoothed her blouse, adjusted her hair, and looked at me with contempt. We're not going anywhere, George. This is your son's family, too. We're family whether you like it or not, and if you try to force us out, we'll fight you in court. She smiled, a cold, sharp thing. We'll tell them you're paranoid, delusional, hiring private investigators to spy on your own family. That doesn't sound like the behavior of a mentally stable person. She walked out of the room, head held high. After a moment of hesitation, Julian followed her, not meeting my eyes. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. True to her word, Victoria didn't leave. Instead, she dug in like a tick, making herself comfortable in my guest room and acting like she owned the place. When I consulted Dominic about eviction options, his answer wasn't encouraging. Colorado law is complicated when it comes to house guests, he explained over the phone. They're not tenants, so standard eviction procedures don't apply. But because you invited them in initially, you can't just call the sheriff and have them removed. You'll need to go through the courts, and that could take weeks, maybe months. Months? The thought of sharing my home with these people for months made my stomach turn. But if I couldn't remove them quickly, I could certainly make their stay less pleasant. The first thing I did was cancel the cable television and internet service. Budget cuts, I explained when Victoria stormed into the kitchen, demanding to know why she couldn't stream her shows. I'm on a fixed income now. Have to prioritize my spending. Fixed income, she practically spat the words. You sold your restaurants for almost $4 million. And I plan to make it last, I said, pouring myself another cup of coffee. Unlike some people, I know how to manage money. The look on her face was almost worth everything else. Next, I stopped buying groceries for the household. My refrigerator, once stocked with fresh produce and quality meats, now contained only items for my personal consumption, labeled with my name, stored in separate containers. You're both adults, I said when Julian hesitantly asked about dinner plans. 41 years old, both of you. I'm sure you can figure out how to feed yourselves. Victoria tried to use my kitchen to cook meals from ingredients she bought herself. Unfortunately, she discovered that several key appliances had developed mysterious malfunctions. The oven's temperature control seemed unreliable, running hot one day, barely warming the next. The garbage disposal made alarming grinding noises. The dishwasher leaked water onto the floor. Nothing dangerous, of course. I'm not a monster, but certainly inconvenient for someone accustomed to having everything handed to her. You should call a repairman, Victoria snapped one evening after burning her third attempt at dinner. I will, I said, not looking up from my book, when I get around to it. The final touch was the roof repair I had been planning for months. I contacted a contractor I knew from my restaurant days, a man who understood the value of starting work bright and early. A crew of 6 workers arrived at exactly 7 in the morning. Their hammers and power tools created a symphony of chaos that made sleep impossible. The work continued for 2 weeks straight. Sorry about the noise, I told Julian one morning as he stumbled into the kitchen looking like he hadn't slept in days. He had dark circles under his eyes and his coffee cup was shaking in his hand. But you know how it is. Got to maintain the property. This cabin's going to be worth even more once the roof is fixed. You'd want that, right? For when you eventually inherit it? He just stared at me with hollow eyes, said nothing, and shuffled back to his room. While the domestic Cold War continued, Brooke was busy behind the scenes. She called me one evening with an update that made my blood pressure spike. I've been digging deeper into Victoria's background, she said. She didn't just visit one psychiatrist about you. She consulted with 3 different doctors over the past 6 months, all of them specializing in geriatric mental health. She told each of them the same story, that she was deeply concerned about an elderly family member showing signs of significant cognitive decline, memory problems, and poor judgment with finances. Building a paper trail, I said. Exactly. She's been setting this up for a long time, Mr. Sterling. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment scheme. This was planned, methodical. She knew exactly what documentation she'd need to make a guardianship case stick. I thanked Brooke and hung up. Then I sat in my study for a long time watching the sun set behind the mountains, thinking about how carefully Victoria had planned this. She had underestimated me. They both had. 3 days later, the official letter arrived. It came in a thick envelope with the seal of the Pitkin County District Court. Inside was a formal petition for emergency guardianship filed by Julian and Victoria Sterling on behalf of their incapacitated family member, George Sterling. Me. The petition cited serious concerns about cognitive decline, increasingly erratic behavior, and demonstrable inability to manage personal and financial affairs. It requested that the court appoint Julian as my legal guardian with full authority over my medical decisions, living situation, and finances. I read it twice, slowly, letting every word sink in. Then I set it down on my desk. They had actually done it. They thought they could win this. I picked up my phone and called Dominic Cross. They filed, I said. Emergency guardianship petition. A pause on the other end, then surprisingly, good. Now they've committed to a course of action they can't take back. Now we have something concrete to respond to. And Mr. Sterling, I think it's time we stop playing defense. It's time to go on the offensive. The meeting took place 2 days later in Dominic's Denver office. We gathered around his conference table. Me, Dominic, Brooke, and Edward Hayes. First things first, Dominic said, spreading documents. We're filing a counter-petition. We're going on the offensive. Harassment, attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult. In Colorado, that's a Class 5 felony. Will it stick? I asked. That depends on how much evidence we can gather. And speaking of evidence, he nodded toward Brooke, who opened her laptop. I've been digging into Julian and Victoria's financial situation. It's worse than we thought. She turned the screen to show a spreadsheet filled with red numbers. Credit card debt of $31. Thousand across 4 cards. An auto loan of $12,000, 3 payments behind. A personal loan from an online lender of $4,000 at 23% interest. Total outstanding debt, $47,000. They're drowning, I murmured. It gets better, Brooke continued. Their apartment in Aurora, they haven't paid rent in 2 months. The landlord filed for eviction last week. They're about to be homeless. Suddenly, their desperate behavior made sense. This wasn't just greed, it was survival. They had burned through their money, and now they were clinging to my cabin like a life raft. There's something else, Brooke said. I found records of Victoria's employment history, and I uncovered a complaint filed against her when she worked as a real estate agent 6 years ago, before she met Julian. An elderly client named Dorothy Miller accused Victoria of manipulation. Victoria tried to convince Dorothy to sell her Littleton house for well below market value to her cousin Jasper. The real estate company settled quietly to avoid publicity, but the records exist. Dorothy is still alive in Boulder, and she is willing to testify. I also found a former colleague, Felicity Clark, who witnessed Victoria bragging about the easy mark. "This changes everything," Dominic said, eyes shining. "A pattern of predatory behavior is gold in court. We amend our counter-petition, add the Dorothy Miller information, and prepare for the hearing." The tension in the cabin reached a breaking point 2 days later. I was making lunch when Victoria stormed into the kitchen, face contorted with rage. "You're trying to destroy me," she screamed. "Digging up old lies." I continued spreading mustard on my bread. "Those events have everything to do with who you are, Victoria. A pattern is a pattern. I was cleared. There were no charges. There was a settlement. You tried to cheat an elderly woman out of $150,000. Sound familiar?" Her face went white. She screamed for Julian. When he appeared looking exhausted, she yelled, "Your father is trying to ruin us." Julian looked between us. "Dad, can we talk? Just the two of us?" Victoria protested, but Julian snapped, "Victoria, please, I need to talk to my father." Stunned, she stormed out. Julian sat down and put his head in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I knew this was wrong the whole time, but I couldn't say no to her." "Tell me something, Julian," I said. "In 7 years of marriage, have you ever once made a decision she didn't approve of?" He had no answer. The next day, my neighbor Beatrice appeared at the fence line. "George, I saw your daughter-in-law at a downtown cafe yesterday, talking intensely with a polished man in a dark suit. She had papers spread out between them." I thanked her and called Brooke. Within 48 hours, Brooke identified him. His name is Garrett Stone, an attorney from Aurora who specializes in aggressive asset recovery, and he just filed a document with the Pitkin County Court. He claims it is your will, signed 3 years ago, leaving everything to Julian and freezing your assets until the guardianship is resolved. "My will? I never signed any such document. It is a complete forgery," I said, stunned. We had to act fast. I underwent a comprehensive medical evaluation with geriatrician Dr. Evelyn Cho. The results: cognitive function in the 98th percentile, no trace of impairment. Meanwhile, forensic document examiner Dr. Allison Finch analyzed the signature. "It's an absolute forgery," she reported. "Pen pressure, letter formation, and baseline alignment are completely inconsistent with your genuine signatures. I'll testify to that." The hearing arrived on a gray morning. Garrett Stone strutted into the courtroom, followed by Victoria and Julian. Judge Abigail Spencer presided. Garrett Stone presented his argument, but Dominic interrupted, presenting Dr. Finch's forensic report and Dr. Cho's medical evaluation. The judge's face turned to ice as she reviewed the forgery findings. "Unless you can contradict this, Mr. Stone, I am taking this very seriously." Garrett Stone panicked, instantly throwing Victoria under the bus. "Your Honor, my client provided me with this document. If it is forged, I had no knowledge. I acted in good faith." Victoria stood up, screaming, "That's not true. He told me he could make it work." Judge Spencer banged her gavel. "Enough. I am denying the petition and referring this matter to the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office for criminal investigation." That night, Julian knocked on my door. We sat in the kitchen with coffee. "I'm a coward, Dad," he wept. "I went along with it because I was afraid." "Going along with it is still a choice, Julian," I said. "I'm not forgiving you yet, but the door isn't closed. It's up to you to walk through it." The next morning, Victoria was gone. She had fled. But Brooke tracked her credit card usage to Las Vegas, where she was hiding at her sister Cynthia's apartment. Nevada State Police arrested her, and she was extradited back to Colorado. Julian cooperated fully, testifying against her. At the trial, Dorothy Miller and Felicity Clark testified, establishing her predatory pattern. The jury took less than 3 hours to find Victoria guilty of forgery, fraud upon the court, and attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult. She was sentenced to 4 years of probation, $15,000 in restitution, and a permanent restraining order. Garrett Stone surrendered his law license to avoid disbarment. Julian moved back to Denver, took a job washing dishes at a neighborhood grill, and began paying off his debts, starting from the bottom just as I had 50 years ago. A year later, he made an anonymous $500 donation to the Sterling Young Restorateurs Fund, the charitable foundation that would inherit 90% of my estate. I knew it was him. Life returned to its quiet rhythm in Aspen. I spend my days fly fishing, reading my antique cookbooks, and having dinner with Beatrice. I stood on my porch, watching the golden autumn leaves fall against the mountain backdrop. Everything I had built was protected. Life goes on, and it is beautiful.